My name is Seraphina, and I am 28 years old. 3 weeks ago, I discovered my entire family had been living a lie that would destroy everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and blood bonds. The voicemail from my mother still plays in my head like a broken record. "You are not family, do not come back. We are moving on without you." But what she did not know was that I had already uncovered the truth about our family's darkest secret, and her betrayal would cost them everything they held dear. Before we dive into this shocking family revenge story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If stories about family betrayal and sweet justice get your blood pumping like mine does, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this tale of family vengeance will leave you speechless. Trust me, you will want to see how this unfolds. The whole nightmare began 6 months earlier when I decided to surprise my parents for their 30th wedding anniversary. I had been living in Portland working as a forensic accountant while my family remained in our hometown of Cedar Falls, Iowa. Despite the distance, I thought we maintained a close relationship. We talked every Sunday, exchanged holiday cards, and I visited during major celebrations. Nothing prepared me for what I would discover in their basement. I had driven 12 hours straight to surprise them, arriving at their house around midnight with bags full of decorations and a custom photo album I had spent months creating. Using my old key, I quietly entered through the back door, planning to set up everything before they woke up. The house felt different, somehow colder and more sterile than I remembered. Family photos that once lined the hallway had been replaced with generic landscape paintings. Needing space to spread out the decorations, I headed to the basement where we used to store holiday items. That is when I found the boxes. Dozens of cardboard boxes labeled with dates spanning the last 25 years. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the one marked Seraphina, birth records. Inside, I found documents that made my blood run cold. There was my birth certificate, but it had been altered. The original showed different parents entirely, Maria Santos and David Chen, both deceased according to the attached death certificates. Below those papers lay adoption documents dated 3 months after my birth, showing that Robert and Linda Morrison had legally adopted me following my biological parents' deaths in a car accident. But that was not the most devastating discovery. Beneath the adoption papers, I found bank statements showing monthly payments of $3,000 deposited into my adoptive parents' account from something called the Santos Chen Memorial Trust. The payments had been ongoing for 28 years, totaling over $1 million. Someone had been paying my parents to raise me, and they had never told me I was adopted. My hands shaking, I continued digging through the boxes. Each one contained more evidence of deception. Medical records showing genetic conditions that did not match what my parents had told me about our family history. School enrollment forms where they had lied about my background. Insurance documents where I was listed as ward of the state before the adoption was finalized. The most heartbreaking discovery was a letter from my biological grandmother, Elena Santos, written just 2 months before I graduated high school. She had been trying to contact me for years, explaining that she was my only living relative and wanted to meet me before she died. She mentioned that she had been the one funding my upbringing through the trust, hoping to ensure I received a good education and loving home. My adoptive parents had received dozens of these letters over the years, all of which they had hidden from me. In that final letter, Elena mentioned that she had terminal cancer and was leaving me her entire estate, including a house in Santa Fe and a successful art gallery business. She begged my adoptive parents to tell me the truth so we could meet before she passed away. According to the medical records I found, she had died 3 years ago, still hoping to see her only grandchild. I spent the next 4 hours in that basement piecing together 28 years of lies. My adoptive parents had not only hidden my true identity, but had also stolen my chance to know my real family. They had collected over $1 million intended to provide for my care, while denying me the knowledge of where I came from. Most painfully, they had let my biological grandmother die, believing I did not want to see her. When I finally emerged from the basement at dawn, my adoptive parents were awake and having coffee in the kitchen. They seemed genuinely surprised to see me, but I noticed how quickly my mother's expression changed from joy to fear when she saw the documents in my hands. "We can explain," my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Explain what?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building inside me. "Explain how you let my grandmother die, thinking I rejected her. Explain how you have been collecting money meant for my care while lying about my entire existence. Or explain how you plan to take this secret to your graves." My mother started crying, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of someone who had been caught. "We did what we thought was best for you," she said. "Your biological family was complicated. We gave you stability. You gave me lies," I replied. "And you stole from me. That trust fund money was meant for my education, my future. Instead, you used it to pay off your mortgage and take vacations while telling me we could not afford my college tuition." That is when my father made the mistake that would seal their fate. Instead of apologizing or showing any remorse, he became defensive and angry. "You have no legal right to any of that money," he said. "We raised you. We fed you and clothed you and put a roof over your head for 18 years. That money was compensation for our time and effort." His words hit me like a physical blow. In that moment, I realized that to them, I had never been their daughter. I had been a business transaction, a source of income disguised as an act of charity. The love I thought we shared had been built on financial incentives and legal obligations, not genuine affection. I left their house that morning, without another word, taking the boxes of evidence with me. As I drove back to Portland, I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. If they wanted to treat my upbringing as a business transaction, then I would handle this situation like the forensic accountant I had become. I would follow the money trail, uncover every deception, and ensure that justice was served. What my adoptive parents did not know was that my expertise in financial fraud investigation was about to become their worst nightmare. They had underestimated the quiet girl they raised, not realizing that I had spent my career learning how to expose people who steal money and destroy lives through deception. The war had begun, but they did not even know they were already losing. Back in Portland, I took 3 weeks of personal leave from my job at the forensic accounting firm. I told my supervisor I was dealing with a family emergency, which was not entirely untrue. During those 3 weeks, I transformed from a heartbroken daughter into a calculating investigator determined to uncover every aspect of my stolen life. My first step was hiring Elena Martinez, a private investigator who specialized in adoption, fraud, and financial crimes. Elena had built her reputation, exposing corrupt adoption agencies and trustees who embezzled funds meant for children's care. When I explained my situation, she immediately understood the scope of the deception. "This is not just about hiding your adoption," Elena told me during our first meeting. "This is systematic fraud. If they have been collecting trust payments under false pretenses while denying you access to your biological family, we are looking at wire fraud, mail fraud, and potentially identity theft." Together, we began building a comprehensive case. Elena obtained copies of all the trust documents from the bank that had been making the payments. What we discovered was even worse than I had initially thought. The Santos Chen Memorial Trust had been established with strict guidelines about my upbringing and education. The monthly payments were meant to ensure I attended college, received music and art lessons, and maintained contact with my cultural heritage through annual visits to Santa Fe. None of these conditions had been met. Instead of using the money for my enrichment, my adoptive parents had violated every term of the trust agreement. They had told the trustees I was thriving and following the educational path outlined in the trust documents, submitting fake progress reports, and forged academic records to justify continued payments. Even more damning was the discovery that they had actively intercepted communications from Elena Santos. The private investigator found evidence that my adoptive parents had changed our mailing address multiple times to prevent my biological grandmother from reaching me directly. They had also contacted Elena's lawyers, falsely claiming that I had expressed no interest in meeting my grandmother and requesting that all contact attempts cease. While Elena worked on the legal aspects of the case, I focused on the financial investigation. Using my professional skills, I traced every dollar of the trust payments through my adoptive parents' bank accounts. The money had funded their lifestyle far beyond what their modest incomes should have allowed. They had purchased a new house, taken expensive vacations, bought luxury cars, and even established college funds for my two younger, adoptive siblings, children they had taken in after me, also for financial incentives from the me state. The pattern became clear. Robert and Linda Morrison were not the loving parents I had believed them to be. They were professional foster and adoptive parents who took in children for the monthly payments and benefits. I was just their first and most profitable long-term investment. My investigation revealed that they had adopted 4 other children over the years, each with their own trust funds or state benefits. 2 of those children had been returned to the system when their funding was reduced. Another had aged out at 18 and was immediately cut off from all family contact. Only my youngest adoptive sister remained in their home, and she was due to receive a significant inheritance from her deceased biological aunt when she turned 21. The coldness of their business-like approach to parenting became even more apparent when I discovered email exchanges between my adoptive mother and a lawyer discussing strategies to maintain guardianship of my younger sister until her inheritance could be accessed. They were already planning how to convince her to sign over portions of her biological family's money to them as reimbursement for her care. Armed with this evidence, Elena and I crafted a multi-pronged strategy for justice. We would not just expose their fraud. We would systematically dismantle the life they had built on stolen money and broken promises. Our first target was the trust fund. Elena contacted the law firm that had administered the Santos Chen Memorial Trust, presenting evidence that the conditions of the trust had been systematically violated. The lawyers were horrified to learn that I had been denied knowledge of my heritage and contact with my grandmother. They immediately began proceedings to recover all misappropriated funds, plus interest and penalties. Simultaneously, we filed complaints with multiple government agencies. The FBI's white-collar crime division was interested in the mail and wire fraud aspects of the case. The state adoption agency was concerned about the systematic deception and began investigating my adoptive parents' other placements. The IRS was very interested in the unreported income and potential tax evasion related to the trust payments, but I wanted more than just legal justice. I wanted them to experience the same sense of betrayal and loss that they had inflicted on me. So I began phase 2 of my plan: social destruction. I started by contacting my adoptive siblings. The 2 who had been returned to foster care were now adults, and both confirmed that Robert and Linda had treated them as temporary income sources rather than family members. They eagerly agreed to provide statements about the emotional abuse and neglect they had experienced. My youngest sister, still living with them, was shocked to learn about my discovery and the pattern of exploitation. Next, I reached out to their extended family, friends, and community members. Using carefully crafted social media posts and concerned family member phone calls, I began sharing the truth about Robert and Linda's adoption fraud. I framed it as a heartbroken daughter, seeking answers about her stolen identity, which generated tremendous sympathy and outrage. The response was immediate and devastating for them. Their church community, where they had been celebrated as saints for rescuing disadvantaged children, was appalled to learn about the financial motivations behind their charitable image. Extended family members who had admired their dedication to adoption began questioning every story they had been told. Most importantly, I contacted other families in their social circle who had adopted children or were considering adoption. I shared my story as a cautionary tale about the importance of transparency and honest communication with adopted children. The ripple effect was significant as these families began asking their own agencies harder questions about oversight and accountability. As the legal and social pressure mounted, I prepared for the final phase of my plan. Everything I had done so far was just the foundation. The real confrontation was still to come, and I wanted to ensure that when it happened, I held every possible advantage. My adoptive parents had built their lives on a foundation of lies and stolen money. Soon, they would discover that their carefully constructed world was about to collapse around them, and the daughter they had betrayed would be the architect of their downfall. 2 months into my investigation, the legal pressure began to show results, but my adoptive parents remained defiant. They had hired an expensive attorney and were fighting every aspect of the case, claiming they had acted in good faith and provided me with a loving home. Their lawyer was spinning a narrative about ungrateful adopted children and greedy relatives, trying to manipulate vulnerable families. This defensive strategy only strengthened my resolve. They were still trying to control the narrative, still treating me like a problem to be managed rather than a person they had wronged. It was time to escalate my efforts and bring in more powerful allies. My breakthrough came when Elena introduced me to Marcus Chen, a distant relative of my biological father. Marcus had been searching for our family's lost heir for years, knowing that Elena Santos had died without being able to pass on her legacy. When he learned about the systematic fraud that had kept us apart, he brought resources and connections that transformed my individual fight into a coordinated campaign for justice. Marcus was a successful civil rights attorney who specialized in cases involving adoption, fraud, and cultural genocide. He explained that my case was part of a larger pattern of agencies and adoptive families deliberately severing children's connections to their ethnic and cultural identities for financial gain. They did not just steal money from you, Marcus explained during our first meeting. They stole your heritage, your language, your connection to your ancestors. In many ways, this is a form of cultural erasure that we see repeatedly in adoption cases involving children of color. Through Marcus, I learned that my biological grandmother Elena had been a prominent artist in the Chicano community, known for her murals celebrating Mexican-American heritage. Her art gallery in Santa Fe was considered a cultural landmark, and she had specifically wanted me to inherit it so I could continue her work, preserving our family's artistic legacy. The gallery alone was worth over $2 million, and Elena had also left detailed letters explaining our family history, including recipes, traditions, and stories that my adoptive parents had denied me access to. She had even commissioned a genealogy research project that traced our family back 6 generations, creating a comprehensive family tree that she hoped to share with me. Marcus helped me understand that the trust fund was just one part of a much larger inheritance that included property, artwork, and cultural artifacts that belonged to our family. My adoptive parents had not only stolen money, they had stolen my entire cultural identity and the opportunity to connect with a rich, artistic heritage. Armed with this expanded understanding of what had been taken from me, we broadened our legal strategy. Marcus filed federal civil rights violations claiming that my adoptive parents had deliberately prevented me from accessing my cultural heritage as part of a discriminatory pattern. He also brought in expert witnesses who could testify about the psychological damage caused by cultural severing in adoption cases. Meanwhile, I continued building my network of allies. Through social media and community connections, I found other victims of Robert and Linda's exploitation. There was Jennifer, who had been adopted by them at age 12 and returned to foster care 2 years later when her monthly state payments were reduced. She described being treated like an unpaid servant and being denied medical care to save money. Then there was Michael, who had aged out of their care at 18 and was immediately told never to contact them again. He had been led to believe that his biological family had abandoned him when in fact his biological uncle had been trying to locate him for years to share a significant inheritance. Most heartbreaking was the story of Carmen, my current adoptive sister, who was 17 and still living with them. Through careful conversations, I learned that they were already pressuring her to sign preliminary documents that would give them access to her trust fund when she turned 18. They had convinced her that her biological family had been involved in illegal activities and that maintaining distance was for her own protection. Together, these victims formed a powerful coalition that exposed the systematic nature of Robert and Linda's exploitation. It was not just about my case anymore. It was about a pattern of abuse that had affected multiple children over more than 2 decades. The media attention began when Marcus connected me with Maria Rodriguez, an investigative journalist who specialized in adoption fraud stories. Maria saw the broader implications of our case and began researching other families who had been victimized by similar schemes. Her preliminary article attracted attention from national news outlets, and soon our story was being covered by major television networks. The media coverage was devastating for my adoptive parents. The local news stations interviewed neighbors and community members who expressed shock and disgust at the revelations. Their church asked them to step down from leadership positions, and several local businesses that had supported their charitable work publicly distanced themselves from the family. But the most significant development came when the FBI expanded their investigation. Agent Sarah Collins contacted me directly to explain that our case had led them to uncover a broader network of adoption fraud, involving corrupt agencies, lawyers, and adoptive families who were systematically exploiting vulnerable children for financial gain. Your case is the key that is unlocking a much larger criminal enterprise, Agent Collins explained. The documentation you provided has helped us identify patterns that we had been investigating for years. Your adoptive parents were not operating alone. The FBI investigation revealed that the adoption agency that had placed me with Robert and Linda had been deliberately matching children who had trust funds or inheritance prospects with adoptive families who were willing to share the financial benefits with the agency. It was a carefully orchestrated system designed to enrich adults at the expense of vulnerable children. This discovery brought even more resources to our fight. The FBI was now treating this as a racketeering case, which meant they could seize assets and pursue criminal charges that carried significant prison time. The adoption agency was shut down pending investigation, and several other families were being investigated for similar fraud. As the legal net tightened around my adoptive parents, I prepared for the final confrontation. But I wanted to ensure that when they finally faced consequences, they would understand exactly what they had taken from me and how their greed had destroyed multiple lives. I spent weeks preparing a comprehensive presentation that documented not just the financial fraud, but the emotional and cultural damage they had caused. I gathered photos of Elena Santos' artwork, recordings of the traditional songs she had wanted to teach me, and letters from extended family members who had been searching for me for years. The most powerful addition to my case came when Marcus arranged for me to visit Santa Fe and see my grandmother's gallery for the first time. Walking through rooms filled with vibrant murals and sculptures that celebrated our shared heritage was both heartbreaking and empowering. Elena had created a legacy that honored our family's journey from Mexico to the United States, and every piece told stories that I should have grown up hearing. In her private studio, I found dozens of unfinished paintings with notes attached explaining which techniques she wanted to teach me and which family traditions were represented in each piece. There were canvases she had prepared for me to practice on, and art supplies she had bought hoping I would visit her someday. The gallery's manager, Sophia, had worked with Elena for 15 years and shared stories about how my grandmother had talked about me constantly, always hoping that someday her granddaughter would join her in preserving our family's artistic legacy. Sophia showed me letters Elena had written to me every year on my birthday, expressing her love and sharing family history she wanted me to know. Armed with this evidence of everything I had lost, I was ready for the final phase of my plan. The legal machinery was in motion, the media attention was building, and my adoptive parents were about to discover that their comfortable life built on lies and stolen money was about to come crashing down around them. They had made one critical error in their calculations. They had underestimated the quiet daughter they had raised to be grateful and compliant. Instead, they had unknowingly trained a forensic accountant who specialized in exposing financial fraud and had the determination to see justice served, no matter how long it took. The reckoning was coming, and I was ready to deliver it personally. The confrontation I had been orchestrating for months finally came to a head on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I had coordinated with Agent Collins Marcus and Elena Martinez to execute a carefully planned simultaneous strike that would expose every aspect of Robert and Linda's fraud while ensuring they could not destroy evidence or flee. At exactly 9 a.m., FBI agents served search warrants at their home and business locations while I arrived with Marcus and a court-appointed mediator to formally confront them about the stolen trust funds. The timing was deliberate. I wanted them to see my face as their world collapsed around them, to understand that their compliant adopted daughter had orchestrated their downfall. When I walked through the front door of the house where I had grown up, Linda was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by financial documents, clearly trying to hide evidence before the agents arrived. The look of shock and terror on her face when she saw me was deeply satisfying. For the first time in my life, she could not control the narrative or manipulate the situation to her advantage. "Hello, Mother," I said calmly, using the title with deliberate irony. "I think it is time we had an honest conversation about family loyalty and financial responsibility." Robert emerged from his office looking haggard and defeated. The confident man who had dismissed my concerns months earlier was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the magnitude of his crimes. The FBI agents were methodically cataloging evidence while social workers interviewed Carmen, my younger, adoptive sister, about her treatment and the pressure she had been under to sign financial documents. Agent Collins approached me with a box of documents they had found hidden in Robert's office safe. Inside were contracts with other adoption agencies, correspondence with lawyers about manipulating trust fund access, and detailed financial records showing exactly how they had laundered the stolen money through various accounts to avoid detection. But the most damning evidence was a handwritten ledger where Linda had calculated the potential earnings from each adopted child, treating us like financial investments with projected returns based on our trust funds and state benefits. Next to my name, she had written Golden Goose, milk for maximum duration, with calculations showing how to delay my discovery of the truth until after they had collected every possible payment. "You kept a ledger," I said to Linda, my voice carefully controlled. "You actually wrote down how much money you expected to make from each child you pretended to love." Linda finally spoke, but instead of showing remorse, she became defensive and cruel. "We gave you everything," she said. "A home, education, stability. That money was compensation for dealing with damaged children nobody else wanted." Her words confirmed everything I had suspected about their motivations, but hearing it said so bluntly still hit like a physical blow. Marcus immediately objected to her characterization, pointing out that I had been a healthy infant whose only trauma was being separated from my biological family by their lies. "You did not give me everything," I replied steadily. "You stole everything. You stole my name, my heritage, my culture, my family connections, and my grandmother's final years. You treated me like a business transaction while pretending to be loving parents." That is when Robert made his final fatal mistake. Instead of accepting responsibility or showing any remorse, he threatened me. "You have destroyed our family over money," he said. "When this is over, when you have gotten your revenge, you will have nothing left. No family, no home, no one who loves you." His threat revealed the depth of his narcissism and manipulation. Even facing criminal charges and the complete exposure of his fraud, he was trying to make me feel guilty for seeking justice. But his words had the opposite effect. They strengthened my resolve and confirmed that I had made the right decision to expose them. Agent Collins interrupted our confrontation to inform Robert and Linda that they were being arrested on federal charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming, and they would be transported immediately for booking and arraignment. As the handcuffs were placed on their wrists, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. These people had shaped my entire childhood, and despite everything they had done, seeing them arrested was emotionally difficult. But I reminded myself of Elena Santos dying alone, believing her granddaughter had rejected her, and my resolve strengthened. Before they were led away, I handed Linda a folder containing photographs from Elena's art gallery and copies of the letters she had written to me every year on my birthday. "This is what you stole from me," I said. "Not just money, but love, culture, and connection to my real family. I wanted you to see her face and understand that she was not just a source of income. She was my grandmother who died heartbroken because of your lies." Linda looked through the photographs with what appeared to be genuine shock. For the first time, she seemed to understand that Elena Santos had been a real person with feelings and hopes, not just a name on trust fund documents. But even then, she could not admit wrongdoing. "We thought we were protecting you," she said weakly. "You were protecting yourselves," I replied, "and now you will face the consequences." As Robert and Linda were taken away in federal custody, Carmen approached me hesitantly. She had been watching the entire confrontation and was clearly struggling to process everything she had learned about our adoptive parents. "What happens to me now?" she asked, and I could hear the fear in her voice. Marcus had already arranged for Carmen to be placed with a vetted foster family who specialized in helping older teens transition to independence. More importantly, he had contacted her biological uncle who had been searching for her since she was placed for adoption and was overjoyed to learn she was safe and wanted to reconnect with her birth family. "You get to choose your own path," I told Carmen. "And you get to keep the inheritance your biological family left for you. No one will ever steal from you or lie to you about who you are ever again." The FBI search of the house yielded enough evidence to support charges against the adoption agency and several other adoptive families who had been part of the fraud network. Financial records showed that Robert and Linda had received over $2 million in fraudulent payments over the years while providing substandard care and emotional abuse to multiple children. As I left that house for the final time, I felt a sense of closure that I had not expected. The people who had raised me were facing justice, the truth about my identity had been revealed, and other victims of their scheme would finally receive the support they deserved. But the most important victory was yet to come. I was finally free to embrace my real heritage and build connections with the family and culture that had been stolen from me. The next phase of my life would not be about revenge. It would be about healing and honoring the legacy that Elena Santos had tried so hard to pass on to her granddaughter. The weeks following Robert and Linda's arrest brought a cascade of consequences that extended far beyond their individual punishment. The FBI investigation had exposed a network of corruption that reached into multiple states and affected dozens of families, making our case a landmark in adoption fraud prosecution. Within 48 hours of their arrest, local media outlets were running daily stories about the Morrison family's systematic exploitation of adopted children. The details that emerged painted a picture of calculated cruelty that shocked even hardened social workers and law enforcement officials. The financial audit revealed that Robert and Linda had collected over $3.7 million through various fraudulent schemes over 22 years. Beyond the trust fund money they had stolen from me, they had been charging administrative fees to biological families, seeking contact with their adopted children, accepting bribes from agencies to take difficult placements, and even selling personal information about their adopted children to marketing companies. Their middle-class lifestyle had been entirely funded by exploiting vulnerable children. The modest jobs they claimed to have were largely fictional. Robert worked only part-time at an insurance office, while Linda had never held steady employment. Their income from adoption fraud had allowed them to purchase 3 properties, take expensive international vacations, and maintain a facade of respectability that had fooled their entire community. The social impact of the revelations was devastating for them. Their church, Cedar Falls Methodist, issued a public statement expressing horror at the deception and announcing that they were reviewing all their adoption support programs to prevent similar fraud. Several families who had considered Robert and Linda mentors in their own adoption journeys felt betrayed and manipulated. Linda's sister Patricia gave an interview to the local newspaper expressing shock and shame. "We always admired them for taking in so many children," Patricia said. "We thought they were saints. To learn that they were actually profiting from these children's trauma is beyond comprehension." The couple's few remaining supporters quickly disappeared as more details emerged. Their defense attorney attempted to portray them as loving parents who had made administrative errors, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The handwritten ledger where Linda had calculated expected profits from each child became a centerpiece of the prosecution's case, making it impossible to claim good intentions. Meanwhile, the investigation expanded to include the Riverside Adoption Agency, which had facilitated many of the fraudulent placements. Federal agents discovered that agency director Margaret Walsh had been taking kickbacks from adoptive families in exchange for matching them with children who had trust funds or inheritance prospects. Walsh's arrest led to the discovery of files on over 200 children who had been deliberately placed with families willing to share financial benefits. Many of these children were now adults who had no idea they had been denied access to inheritance money or contact with biological relatives who had been searching for them. The ripple effects reached into the state legislature, where lawmakers began drafting emergency reforms to adoption oversight and transparency requirements. The governor appointed a special commission to review all adoptions processed through agencies under investigation with a mandate to reconnect separated families and recover stolen funds. For me personally, The immediate aftermath was both vindicating and overwhelming. The media attention brought me into contact with dozens of other victims of adoption fraud, many of whom shared stories that were heartbreakingly similar to mine. We formed an informal support network that became instrumental in healing from the trauma of systematic betrayal. The financial recovery process began immediately. The court froze all of Robert and Linda's assets pending restitution hearings, and forensic accountants began the complex process of tracing and recovering the stolen trust fund money. Marcus estimated that I would eventually recover the full amount plus interest and penalties totaling nearly $4 million. But the money was only part of the healing process. The more significant recovery was emotional and cultural. Through Marcus and the extended Chen family network, I began learning about my Hispanic heritage and the artistic legacy that Elena Santos had hoped to share with me. I spent my first Thanksgiving in 28 years with my actual family, cousins, aunts, and uncles who had been searching for me since Elena's death. They shared stories about my grandmother's dedication to preserving our family history and her heartbreak over being unable to connect with me. Carmen's reunion with her biological family was equally powerful. Her uncle Miguel had been fighting the adoption system for years, trying to regain custody after her parents died in an industrial accident. The agency had falsely told him that Carmen was thriving in a loving home and that contact would be disruptive to her adjustment. The truth was that Miguel's family had been wealthy enough to provide excellent care for Carmen, but the agency chose the Morrison placement because they could profit from the arrangement. Carmen's inheritance from her parents' life insurance settlement had been managed by the agency in cooperation with the Morrisons, who had been systematically draining the account through fraudulent expenses. As the legal proceedings continued, Robert and Linda's defense became increasingly desperate. They attempted to portray themselves as victims of the adoption system who had been pressured into fraudulent behavior by corrupt agencies. When that failed, they tried to claim that their adopted children had been ungrateful and demanding, requiring expensive interventions that justified the trust fund expenditures. These defense strategies only made their situation worse. Child welfare experts testified that the Morrisons had provided minimal care while collecting maximum benefits, and financial experts demonstrated that the vast majority of trust fund money had been used for personal expenses unrelated to child care. The prosecution presented evidence that Linda had researched expensive private schools and cultural programs that were supposed to be funded by my trust, then pocketed the money while enrolling me in standard public education. She had submitted fake receipts and progress reports to the trust administrators for years, showing a level of premeditation that made their crimes particularly heinous. As their trial date approached, Robert and Linda's marriage began to deteriorate under the pressure. Linda attempted to negotiate a plea deal that would place primary blame on Robert while he tried to portray her as the mastermind behind the financial schemes. Their desperation to avoid prison time led them to betray each other just as thoroughly as they had betrayed their adopted children. The community that had once celebrated them as charitable saints now treated them as pariahs. Their house was vandalized multiple times, and they received hundreds of angry letters from people who felt deceived by their false image. The Cedar Falls School District removed Robert's name from a volunteer appreciation plaque, and the local adoption support group disbanded in shame over having promoted their story as an inspiration. But perhaps the most fitting consequence was the loneliness they experienced. Having built their entire social identity around their reputation as loving, adoptive parents, they had no genuine relationships to fall back on when the truth was revealed. The children they had exploited wanted nothing to do with them. Their extended family felt betrayed and manipulated, and their community had rejected them completely. They had spent decades building a life based on lies and stolen money, and now they faced the reality of having nothing authentic left. Their greed had cost them not only their freedom, but any possibility of genuine human connection or redemption. 6 months after Robert and Linda's conviction and sentencing to federal prison, I stood in Elena Santos' art studio in Santa Fe, finally ready to begin the work she had dreamed we would do together. The federal court had awarded me full restitution plus punitive damages, totaling $4.2 million, but the financial victory felt secondary to the cultural and emotional healing that had taken place. The studio was exactly as Elena had left it, preserved by her longtime assistant Sophia, who had refused multiple offers to purchase the space. Walking among canvases that my grandmother had prepared specifically for teaching me traditional techniques felt like coming home to a place I had never been but had always belonged. Marcus had helped me understand that Elena's artistic legacy was about more than individual paintings. It was about preserving stories and traditions that connected our family to generations of Mexican-American experiences. Her murals throughout Santa Fe depicted the journey from Mexico to the United States, the struggles and triumphs of building new lives while maintaining cultural identity, and the importance of passing wisdom from one generation to the next. I spent my first month in Santa Fe simply learning about the woman whose bloodline I carried. Sophia shared stories about Elena's dedication to community art programs, her mentorship of young artists, and her unwavering belief that art could heal trauma and build bridges between cultures. Elena had established scholarship programs for underprivileged students and had donated countless pieces to organizations serving immigrant families. The gallery itself was a testament to her vision of art as a force for social change. Every piece in the collection told stories about resilience, identity, and the power of maintaining connections to ancestral wisdom. Walking through those rooms, I finally understood what Robert and Linda had stolen from me. Not just money or family connections, but an entire worldview about purpose, community, and the responsibility to use talents for something greater than personal gain. My first attempt at creating art in Elena's studio was emotionally overwhelming. I had no training in painting or sculpture, but Sophia guided me through basic techniques while sharing stories about how Elena had planned to introduce me to our family's artistic traditions. The first piece I completed was a small canvas depicting hands reaching across generations, a visual representation of the connection that had been broken but was now being restored. Carmen joined me in Santa Fe after her own reunion with her biological family proved successful. Her uncle Miguel had welcomed her with the love and support she had never received from the Morrisons, and she was thriving in an environment where her Hispanic heritage was celebrated rather than hidden. She enrolled in art classes at the local community college and discovered a passion for photography that complemented the gallery's mission. Together, we began planning ways to honor Elena's legacy while creating our own path forward. The gallery would continue its community programs, but we wanted to expand its mission to include support for other victims of adoption, fraud, and cultural separation. We established the Elena Santos Foundation, dedicated to helping adopted children reconnect with their biological families and cultural heritage. The Foundation's first major project was partnering with Marcus and other attorneys to provide legal assistance for families separated by fraudulent adoption practices. The FBI's investigation had identified hundreds of children who had been deliberately disconnected from their biological families, and many needed help navigating complex legal processes to establish contact or recover stolen assets. We also created an art therapy program for young people who had experienced trauma related to family separation or cultural displacement. The program combined traditional artistic techniques with counseling support, allowing participants to explore their identity and heritage through creative expression. The media attention surrounding our case had attracted interest from documentary filmmakers and investigative journalists who wanted to explore the broader issues of adoption, fraud, and cultural preservation. Rather than simply telling our personal story, we used these platforms to educate people about the systemic problems in adoption practices and the importance of maintaining children's connections to their heritage. Robert and Linda received sentences of 12 and 15 years, respectively, in federal prison. Their co-conspirators at the adoption agency received similar sentences, and the broader investigation led to reforms in adoption oversight that protected thousands of other children from similar exploitation. The financial restitution they were ordered to pay would fund victim services and legal assistance programs for years to come. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of their punishment was the complete collapse of the false identity they had built. The community that had once celebrated them as model citizens now understood them as criminals who had exploited vulnerable children for personal gain. Their legacy would be defined not by the grateful families they pretended to help, but by the lives they had damaged through greed and deception. More importantly, their convictions sent a clear message to other potential fraudsters that adoption systems were no longer easy targets for exploitation. The reforms implemented as a result of our case included mandatory transparency requirements, regular auditing of trust funds, and guaranteed access to biological family information for adopted children. As I write this, I have been living in Santa Fe for 8 months, slowly building the life that Elena had envisioned for us to share. I am learning Spanish, studying traditional art techniques, and developing relationships with extended family members who have embraced me with the unconditional love I had always craved. The gallery is thriving under my direction with new exhibitions that celebrate contemporary Hispanic artists while honoring traditional techniques and themes. We recently opened a permanent display featuring Elena's correspondence with me, the birthday letters and family stories she had written, hoping someday I would read them. These letters have become one of our most popular exhibits, resonating with visitors who understand the importance of intergenerational connection. Carmen and I have become the sisters we were meant to be, supporting each other through the ongoing process of healing from the Morrison family's betrayal, while building our own chosen family of people who value authenticity and genuine love over financial gain or social status. The most powerful realization from this entire experience has been understanding that family is not determined by legal documents or shared genetics alone. True family is built through mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Elena Santos, whom I never met in person, was more family to me than the people who raised me, because she loved me unconditionally and wanted me to thrive as my authentic self. Looking back on this journey from discovery to justice to healing, I am grateful for the strength that carried me through the darkest moments and the allies who supported my fight for truth. The money Robert and Linda stole has been recovered. The legal system has held them accountable for their crimes, and most importantly, I have reclaimed the heritage and identity they tried to deny me. This story has been about more than just family revenge. It has been about the power of truth, the importance of cultural identity, and the possibility of healing even after devastating betrayal. If you have ever felt disconnected from your family or heritage, or if you have witnessed injustice that needed to be exposed, I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and demanding justice? How do you think karma works in family situations like this? Please like this video if Elena's story of perseverance resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family drama, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that it is possible to rebuild your life after betrayal. Thank you for joining me on this journey of discovering that sometimes the family that truly loves you is the one you choose for yourself, and remember that standing up for truth, even when it is difficult, can lead to healing you never thought possible.